From KAMR Local 4 News, your local election headquarters, this is Politics Today.
From the classroom to the Capitol, how our state representative is making it happen and her motivation behind the program. And we're going to hear the latest on the education savings accounts, including the deadline that has been extended. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Politics Today. For those students here on the High Plains interested in politics, it's a multi-hour trip to visit the state capitol. But Representative Caroline Fairley, who represents this area, has a program aimed at getting students from District 87 to the 512. Politics Today's Princess Bryant sat down with her. Here's the interview.
Thanks for tuning in. I am Joy with Representative Fairley. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, so first let's talk about your new student leadership program that kind of brought you out here you wanted to discuss.
Yes, so the Panhandle Leadership Program we just launched this week, and I am so excited about this. So how this will work is we partnered with our ISDs here in District 87, and 7th and 8th graders will come up with a bill idea, any bill idea, and write an essay about it. And then our teachers will pick the top students, and those top students will bring them to Austin. We'll do a day in the life as a legislator. We'll bring them on the House floor. We'll walk them through the process of what does it look like to pass a bill, bring them into a committee hearing room, walk them through how that works, and just kind of give a front row seat into what it's like to be a legislator for them. So we're really excited. We've had a lot of good feedback from our public schools and some private schools here, and excited to get that going in May.
Yeah, and tell me, why is it important for students to know what's going on in Austin, how their districts are fighting for them out there?
Well, one, it's such a great question. There's a few things. I would say one, we want to empower our Panhandle students to go and make a difference and make a change in Texas. And I love providing opportunities for the next generation to have them have a front row seat and to get to see what it looks like to be a state rep. And see that their voice does matter, and they can also make a difference. They can run for office. They can be involved locally in their city or town where they end up being. And I was telling someone the other day, I can tell people all day what it's like to be a state rep, but I think until you get a little more of a front row seat to see what it looks like, it does make a difference. And I'm excited to let these students also come up with bill ideas and let them be creative with that and write an essay and think critically about how policies do impact people and how important it is that the policies we pass in Texas, we want to be mindful about the legislation, what it looks like, and the cost of it, and all those just kind of basic fundamentals of passing laws. And so far, yeah, we're just excited to get it going.
Yeah. And during your time in Austin, you've done a lot for students in particular when it comes to state of Texas. Tell me, why do students have such a special place in your heart?
Well, I think one of the reasons is because I'm young, being the youngest member in the Texas House. I would say naturally so, I'm just closer to that age. And so I have a little bit of a soft spot of encouraging young people to be involved. And then the other part is just because of my age, I am closer to that generational, Gen Z. I was born in '99, and so our seniors in high school are, less than 10 years younger than me. And so when you talk about phones in schools, we talk about kid safety, but we talk about social media and how this is impacting this generation. I think it's important, and I think because I am so close to it, given my age, I think it's important. And the other thing is, when we look at the future of Texas, we want to empower our future young people to be involved in civics, to be involved in politics, to have a seat at the table, to put your nose out there and stand for what you believe in, to not be afraid. And so all of those, I think, principles and beliefs, I love getting to encourage other people to do it.
Yeah. And tell me, when can people sign up for this program? How will it all work? When are they expecting it?
So we sent out a press release this week, but you can reach out to our office, my email. It's very easy to find online. Through socials, you can reach out, but my Chief of Staff, Ellie Berry, will be handling all communications to get the schools going and kind of tell them the rubric of what we're doing and get them connected.
And is it all schools across the state, or are you focusing on these area schools?
District 87 right now. Maybe I'm hoping with a new, we have a new member coming in, maybe we'll expand it and do it all the Panhandle. That would be maybe fun to do next year.
Yeah. And tell me the response you guys heard kind of so far after releasing out this information.
The response has been great. From the beginning of this, we originally were thinking about this about 6 to 7 months ago and have been working with our educators already in the last 6 months about, is it feasible, does it make sense? We didn't want to start something and schools be like, we don't have capacity for this. And so we have been engaging our schools, several different superintendents over the past 6 months, talking about what would make sense, what would be appropriate for 7th and 8th graders, what would make sense for them for a day in the life as a legislator, and make it sure that it's appropriate for their age, and also feasible for our teachers and educators, and it wasn't just an overburden. So the process has been in the works for the last 6-7 months, and so far the feedback has been great. And I've honestly been so thankful to talk with and get to engage our office with some of our 7th and 8th grade educators to help us kind of formulate this plan. And so, yeah, but the feedback's been wonderful.
Now, as she said, any school that's interested in being a part of this program in her district can call the Chief of Staff. That's Ellie Berry. We've got this story and contact information waiting for you over on our website, myhighplains.com. Up next, we spoke with Fairley as the Education Freedom Account application is now open at least for a little while longer. She responds to some concerns and gives more insight into how the bill will work and how it impacts Amarillo and the surrounding area. It's one of the most controversial pieces of legislation in the past few decades here in Texas. Education Freedom Accounts, or what was nicknamed at one point school vouchers. The program has launched, and Politics Today's Princess Bryant spoke to Representative Fairley about how that process has gone so far.
And kind of sticking with education, the Texas Freedom Accounts launched their application this summer.
Yes.
And they're going to be starting next year. So tell me kind of the response you've seen from the district. How are people reacting to this program being available to them?
So yes, I'm so excited to talk about this. So Education Savings Accounts, ESAs, are in full launch. Applications are open. And I believe there's, as I checked yesterday, over 175,000 applicants in Texas. And so far it's been clear that there has been a need for this. The fact that I think within the first 24 hours, I mean, we had over 100,000 applicants. And so I think it shows that people and parents are interested in this. They want to have some access about where their kid goes to school. And I think it's been wildly very, very positive so far.
And we are hearing reports that a lot of people who applied, they were already families in the private school system.
Yes.
Tell me kind of your response to that.
Yeah, so this is such an interesting point, and I'm glad we're talking about this because I think there's always miscommunication when it comes to media and having to fact check what's true, what's not true. And obviously when the ESAs were rolled out, there was a concern from people saying, is this funding only going to private school kids or to the wealthy? We heard numerous arguments about that. And what I'll say is, one, in the legislation, in the actual bill that is now law, we put metrics to say that the funding is first going to lower income and also kids with disabilities. And so, the number of students that are in that 175,000 that are in private school, the first funding that the ESAs are going to are those two first. And so this idea that, oh no, they're all going to these wealthy families or kids in private schools, the focus is about those two brackets right there, lower income, kids with disabilities. And what I will say too is I think there's other parts of Texas where you have families that are in low income, that their kid is in private school and they're sacrificing because maybe they live in a district that doesn't have a very good public school. And we want to help those parents, and let them decide. Maybe they go to private school, maybe they go to public, but let them decide. But ultimately, I think to your point is, it's important to remember is that in the bill that is law, we set those metrics there on purpose to ensure that it isn't just going to these wealthy families and that we're prioritizing kids that need it and would be helpful for their education.
Since we did this interview with Representative Fairley, the ESA applications have been extended. This after a lawsuit was filed by parents in private schools alleging that Texas excluded Islamic private schools from participating. A judge ruled to extend the deadline and allow the Islamic schools to apply. Speaking of education, it was a bill that is supposed to enhance a student's education while in the classroom. Representative Fairley speaks on the bill that has caused backlash and even a bomb threat. That's next. It wasn't the most popular piece of legislation, especially for school-age children, but Representative Fairley was essential in the passage of a cell phone ban in schools. Politics Today's Princess Bryant spoke with her about that new law and the reaction it's getting.
You have a passion for students in the schools in Texas.
Yes.
And during your first legislative session, you actually worked on the cell phone ban bill. Tell me what made you want to be a part of that and what reaction have you heard from educators and also parents as well?
Yeah, so one, It was such an honor to get to pass the legislation to get rid of phones in schools. And I remember when I passed this, I was a little nervous about the implementation because we had heard some pushback of, some superintendents weren't happy. I had a lot of calls with superintendents in Houston and Dallas and all over the state about how would this work? How can we implement it well? How do we allow, the principle of it and the root was kids don't need to be in phones in schools. Educators had been telling me all the time, we need some help from the state on this. And how does it look to implement something without having too much regulation on our public schools? And thankfully, AISD was so helpful because they were already leading the way in this. And so they were really helpful in helping us draft what does that look like and what's appropriate and post this bill going into effect. I think the first 3 months were a little, just as the implementation, students weren't very happy. And I can tell you, I have quite a few emails from some 16 and 17-year-olds telling me they are not happy with me. And I could share a whole other story about that. I got a bomb threat about it, a few months ago, which was really interesting. And so, we've had some feedback, but I'll tell you, since I would say, November, about the holidays there, the stories we have heard from not only students, but also our superintendents, our teachers, have been incredible. I mean, test scores have increased. There's no more, there's way less behavioral issues happening. Kids are paying attention. And honestly, I've heard, the most repetitive thing I've heard is that there's almost been this freedom lifted from the students, that they think, I've always been addicted to my phone, and in the lunchroom, I'm on my phone, but now that it's not an option, I want to communicate with my students, and I'm enjoying school more. I'm enjoying getting to know my fellow colleagues and my teachers, and I'm engaging in the classroom. And so we have heard, I cannot tell you the amount of stories we have heard that are positive from all over the state. I heard one student say, I feel like I'm actually enjoying my education. Yeah. And I'm actually in the classroom, the cafeterias are loud, and students are engaging. They're bringing board games to school. They're playing flag football in their free time. And so I've been really thankful that the feedback has been really positive.
Yeah. And we just ended the primary elections where you ran unopposed. But in November, you will be opposed.
Yes.
How are you preparing for the November election? What people can kind of expect out of you?
Well, I feel like I'm in some ways always preparing, and I was so thankful I didn't have a primary election. And I do have, obviously, a Democrat in the November, and obviously no election is taken for granted. I think that it's the same as what we did. We'll be out in the district. I've already been out in the district communicating with people, being at different events, being engaged in the community, talking about our next legislative priorities, what we're looking at getting done, and just not taking it for granted. And I'll tell you, if I may for a minute, I think that the statewide elections is what, as Republicans, need to get out to vote. I'll tell you, with this U.S. Senate seat between James Tallarico and whoever Republican nominee, I think it's a really important election for us to be sure we get out to vote. When you see someone like Representative Tallarico, who I served with in the legislature, and I know him very well, make claims based off of biblical things that I would say are not factual with the Bible. When someone's saying that God is non-binary and that the Bible doesn't talk about same-sex marriage or abortion, I would challenge Christians, because I take my faith seriously, to test, what is being said by a politician with what the Bible says. And I think when you have a politician using that to get votes, I think it's a big red flag that we should all be aware. And I think it applies for anybody. I think it applies for, Christians who match politics with their faith. And at the end of the day, I'm so thankful that ultimately our hope is in God, and our hope is in something far greater than politics. But I think in regard to the November, we've got to be really mindful of who we're voting for, do the research, go out and figure out what do these people believe in, what do they not believe in, and make sure you know and are educated. And I think it can sometimes be hard to do that, but I'm looking forward to just making sure that we get out to vote. I'm encouraging people to get out to vote and be a part of that, and move on past it.
And with Smithy stepping down from his role at Austin, regardless if it's the Democratic candidate or Republican candidate that wins in November, it will be a freshman in Austin representing District 86, and you'll be entering your sophomore year. Tell me about having these fresh voices representing Amarillo and Austin.
Well, I am so excited to get to serve with Holly. We're having lunch in a few weeks to talk about this next session, and I can guarantee our offices are going to work very well together to be sure that we, pass good policies and are mindful of the Panhandle. And I think Holly will do a wonderful job. I think she'll work very hard, and I'm excited for fresh new voices. I think it's good for the Panhandle, and as much as I am very sad about Chairman Smithy, and he was so wonderful, and I enjoyed getting to serve a session with him, I think Holly will be, a great replacement and do a fantastic job.
And if you do win the November election, tell me what can voters expect out of you as you head back into Austin?
Well, the same thing I think I said when I first ran 2 years ago, I had told voters, you know, who I am in Amarillo is going to be who I am in Austin. And ultimately, I'm going to make decisions that I think represent the Panhandle, but also are based on my principles. And I believe, based on this last session, that is what happened. And my goal is to continue that out, to continue to commit to my word that, you know, who we are in Austin, we're going to represent the Panhandle, and we're going to be, you know, above reproach. We're going to make good decisions. We're going to think about what's good for the Panhandle and, you know, really what's good for Texas. And so I would say focused on working hard. I'll tell you, in Austin, I learned if you work hard, you can get a lot of things done. And it's amazing what hard work does. And so I'm excited to return, and my commitment is I'm going to continue to work hard to represent the Panhandle, continue to focus on legislation that's practical and makes sense for Texas, and make sure that we have a strong voice. I think there's, you know, 3 or 4 of us that represent really all of West Texas.
Yeah.
And so our representation is really important, that we stick together and make sure we make a difference for the Panhandle.
I do want to add some context to something that Representative Caroline Farrelly said, because obviously Tallarico is not here to defend what Farrelly mentioned there. But we believe that she's going back to, that was something that was reported back in 2021. Tallarico argued, and I'm quoting here, masculine and feminine, that God is, quote, masculine and feminine and everything in between. So that was the comment I think she was referring to from 2021. Tallarico also says that Jesus specifically, not anyone else in the Bible, never addresses same-sex marriage or abortion. I think that's what, as we went back after she had mentioned that, we went back to try to fact check some things, and that's what we came up with. Now, while Farrelly spoke about already working with Holly Jeffries, who is running for state representative in District 86, she hasn't quite won yet. Jeffries will face Democrat Colin Knutson in November. The reason why it was important for us to add that context is because we couldn't have Tallarico on the show today. Our wildfire season came early, but it is leaving its scar on the High Plains. How Representative Farrelly says lawmakers are working even harder to help out those who have been impacted. One of the biggest things impacting our area right now is the impacts of wildfires, grass fires, and other huge impacts to farmers and ranchers. Politics Today's Prentice Bryant spoke with Farrelly about that as well.
With this part of Texas also comes severe weather.
Yes.
We just saw some wildfires take place across the Panhandle. Tell me, how are you working to bring relief to the ranchers, the farmers, and everyone who was kind of affected by that?
Well, we did a lot this last session. A few things. We got funding for a wildfire database center. Senator Sparks, we worked with him on that. And then we also got $200 million for our volunteer fire departments. It's a really big issue in the rural areas. And so what I can tell you is, one, wildfires were a huge priority for, you know, up in Canadians, you know, Ken King, for Senator Sparks, John Smithy, and I, to be sure that we pass legislation. And so all of those will start to be coming into effect. And looking into next session, we've just got to be mindful about where we're at. You know, wildfires are a real issue here. And I think it's really important. Funding is great, but also investing in technology that, you know, can help prevent wildfires from happening. There's a Pano AI that can, you know, see wildfires from, they detect like the smoke on the cameras, and they help prevent the wildfire spreading because you can catch it earlier. So I think there's even new, you know, just technologies that we want to invest in to be sure that we help our farmers and ranchers. I can tell you, you know, it's devastating when you talk with these farmers and ranchers and their acres of land are burned, and it just makes them have to start over. And so, you know, it's their families, it's their family farms, it's their legacy, it's their kids, it's their community. And so it's really important to me that we make sure that we get funding, we get, you know, good legislation that's, you know, smart and ahead of the curve to help our rural communities. And I know that that will continue to be a priority next session.
Yeah, and talking about our farmers and ranchers, a big thing for them is water. So tell me about the state's Water Safe Plan. What does that kind of look like? So
there's a lot of water policy being discussed. I will tell you, I think next session will be one of the bigger water sessions. We did have a big water session this last year, but there's a lot of conversations about, you know, Texas is very diverse when it comes to water. West Texas is so much different than East Texas. You know, we have the Ogallala Aquifer, but East Texas has a very different issue versus the urban areas. And so I know that we allocated a lot of funding to be, you know, just specific to the water plan to start saving up to make sure we can, you know, send out funding where it needs to go in Texas. I'll tell you, there's conversations about, you know, how do we help our groundwater districts, and I can, you know, we had a committee hearing, I think it was about a few weeks ago, and there will continue to be committee hearings, but a lot of discussion about how do we plan for the long term of Texas. And I think one thing that is very important to me is protecting private property rights. We have got to protect private property rights.
Don't forget, you can always stay up on the latest political news with us over on our website, myhighplains.com. We appreciate you spending the last 30 minutes with us. We hope that you have a wonderful week, and we will see you next week.